and today we are getting spooky with candy corn. Today we are going to make a candy corn table runner. This really is a simple project. If you've never quilted before, I think you can do this one. And just so you know the final measurements, when you are finished this project, it should measure at around 14 inches by 34 inches. So let's jump into that tutorial and sew ourselves a fun candy corn table runner.
Start by cutting 2 orange strips, 1 yellow strip, and 1 white strip of fabric. You will cut them all at 2.5 inches by 42 inches. Now 42 inches is generally the width of the fabric from selvage to selvage. Double check that the fabric that you purchased is at least 42 inches in width. Then sew 3 of these strips together using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, making sure that your orange strip of fabric is in the middle. And then press the seams open. Once you've done that, then you'll have a nice long strip of fabric here and you'll start cutting your triangles out. Now to cut your triangles, you'll find your 60-degree line on your cutting ruler and you will start cutting out your triangles going from one end all the way to the other. Now if you want to see this done properly, I do have a tutorial on a hexagon table topper, which I will link up above as well as below. And in that tutorial, I show you how I cut these strips properly. This time around, I decided I wanted to try something a little bit different. So on the points, I actually measured a 1/4 of an inch between the top point and where I cut next, and I did that all the way across. But I actually do not recommend doing that because you will end up with triangles that are not all the same size. So stick with the tried and true and just line up that 60-degree line along the bottom of your fabric and angle it up to your last point and cut across. You will get the perfect triangles that way. Now, as you can see here, I actually have more triangles than I'm going to end up using for this particular table topper. So just take out 2 of those triangles. If you did end up with some extras, that way you have a total of 8 of these adorable candy corn triangles, and then we can move on to cutting our black triangles. To cut your black triangles, you will need a strip of fabric cut at 6.5 inches by the 42-inch selvage to selvage. And you should get 10 triangles out of that piece of fabric. And you will need 10 black triangles. And now it's time to attach all of our triangles together. So lay them out on your table so that they're in the correct order. Make sure that your black triangles are pointing outwards and your candy corns are pointing inwards. And your candy corns should be alternating. After they've been laid out correctly, then it's time to sew all of your triangles together. I like to do this by starting in the middle, and you will sew all of your triangles together using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And after sewing each triangle together, I would bring it to my iron and I would just press my seam to the side as I went. I found it made it easier to attach the next triangle onto the previous triangle. Something to note as you're attaching all of these triangles together is to make sure that you are getting about a 1/4 inch worth of space above your candy corn point. Now the reason for this is because you will be attaching, using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, a strip of orange in between, and you don't want to sew over the point of your candy corn. If you do, it's fine. Mistakes happen. Nobody looks at your quilting that closely, I promise you. But as you're putting your triangle together, that's the time to pay attention to that point. And once you've sewn your 2 strips of triangles together, now you can face them towards each other. And if your candy corn points don't point directly across from each other, that is okay, because we are going to be adding this nice 2.5 inch strip of fabric in between our points. So it will give you some grace there for them not pointing towards each other perfectly. But before we add that orange strip, it's time to straighten out our 2 triangle strips. So just lay it on your cutting mat, lay your ruler along the edge, and just cut straight across on both sides, making sure that you really aren't removing much of the fabric at all. You're removing some of the extra points and you're just straightening out the fabric more than actually removing too much of the fabric, and do that on both sides. And now it's time to actually add that orange strip. So you'll add it along the black triangle's edge. Of course, lay your fabric right sides together. And just make sure that you have enough orange fabric hanging off of both outer edges. That way, if you want to cut your table runner into a point on the outer edge, you have the flexibility to do so because you've given yourself a little bit of extra fabric. So once you've clipped that strip along the outer edge, then just take it to your sewing machine and sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance. As you can see here, I'm just having a look at my points to see if I sewed over any of them. And I did sew over that second one. I could pick it out, but I think I'm just gonna leave it alone. I don't think anyone will notice. And then take it to your iron so that you can press open that seam before you attach the second panel. Now, the best way that I found to attach the second panel is to just mark with a ruler from the top of your candy corn point and just draw a line on the orange piece of fabric. That way, when you attach your second panel, you'll be able to line up those markings with the top points of your candy corn, and then you'll be able to pin it across. And then all you have to do is sew that 1/4 inch seam all the way across. Once you've sewn that 1/4 inch seam, then just take it to your iron and press open all of these seams one more time, and you can see what your table runner will look like. Now for myself, I chose to cut my orange ends straight off, but if you prefer, you can follow the line of your triangle and create a point on each end of your table runner. Now because this was my test run, I didn't leave myself enough orange fabric, so I just chose to cut it right off. And now it's time to cut out our batting and our backing for our table runner. So for this particular table runner, you really only need to buy about a 1/2 meter or a 1/2 yard of fabric, and that will be plenty for a backing. And I used as thin of a piece of batting as I could find because as a table topper, you really don't want it to be super poofy and thick. Then lay your table topper on top of your batting and on top of your backing, and then just do a rough cut around your entire table topper, leaving around 2 inches worth of excess around the entire outer edge. This just helps with the quilting process, as sometimes the top layer of fabric shifts a little bit when you're actually quilting. It's at this point that you need to decide whether or not you want binding. If you're going to do binding, then follow the rest of these steps. If you do not want to do binding, I have a tutorial on how to do a table topper that does not use binding. So I will link to that up above as well as down below. And you can definitely check out that tutorial and it will walk you through all of the steps so that you do not have to do binding if you would prefer. If you are going to do binding, then just lay all 3 pieces of fabric one on top of each other, making sure the wrong sides are facing in, and then pin it all together. Now it's time to quilt your table topper. I used black thread. I used some fancy stitches on the inside of my table topper, but all of the rest I just used a regular stitch and used the side of my presser foot to just guide me along some of those seams. Then grab your quilter's ruler and just trim away all of the excess fabric. As you can see here, it is easy to have a point at each end of your table runner if you wish. I just, like I said, did not give myself enough wiggle room with my orange strip. And now that the entire thing has been quilted and trimmed, all you have to do is add your binding. So for binding, I did cut 3 more strips, 2.5 inches by 42 inches in length of the orange fabric, and I did orange around the entire outer edge. To make one long strip of binding, I took my strips, laid them right sides together on the corners, and then sewed diagonally across from point to point. Once you've sewn that seam, then just cut away that excess corner. Then take this long strip that you've created, fold it in half, wrong sides facing in, and just iron it. Now you have a perfect piece of binding to attach to your table topper. To do this, turn your table topper over, line up the outer edge of your binding with the outer edge of your table topper, and then attach your binding. Now I will link to a tutorial down below as well as up above to my how to add bias tape to a project. Now this is a little bit different because we have made our own homemade bias tape, so it looks a little bit different, but the way that we fold it at the corners will be the same concept. So the big difference here is that our bias tape is not going to have a bunch of ironed folds in it. We are actually going to sew along this outer edge with a 1/4 inch seam all the way around, and you will want to have your bias tape overlapping itself about 3 inches on either end. That way you'll be able to attach your binding together at the edge, which you will also see in that other tutorial. So as you can see here, I have my homemade binding attached to my project, and I'm just flipping it over, and then I will sew again around the entire thing, just sealing that in place.
So, do you like candy corn? Do you eat candy corn? Let me know in the comments down below. I must admit, I'm not a fan of candy corn, but I do enjoy the look and the shape, and I am going to have a lot of fun having this on my table at home. So I hope that you guys have a wonderful day. Subscribe, hit that notification bell, all of those YouTube-y things if you want more fun tutorials like this. And I hope that you have a spooky Halloween. Bye for now.